The vast Imperial flagship Dominator hung in the darkness of space, its sleek metal hull gleaming under the light of an unfamiliar star. Admiral Vex stood before the massive viewscreen, his six-fingered hands clasped behind his back. For 800 years, the Galactic Empire had ruled unchallenged across 17,000 star systems. Their technological supremacy was absolute, their military might unquestioned. Until today. "Report," Vex demanded, his voice carrying the weight of imperial authority that had made countless species tremble. "Unknown vessels approaching Sector 7, replied his first officer. 5 ships. Configuration unknown. They aren't responding to standard Imperial identification protocols." Vex narrowed his eyes. Another primitive species thinking they can expand beyond their borders. "Show me." The screen flickered, revealing 5 vessels of unusual design. They weren't the sleek, uniform ships of the Empire, but rather a mix of functional shapes with visible weapon systems and strange, glowing engines. "Open communications," ordered Vex. The screen changed to show the interior of the lid ship. A male human sat in what appeared to be the command chair. He wore a simple dark uniform with minimal decorations. Behind him, other humans worked at various stations, their movements quick and confident. "This is Admiral Vex of the Galactic Imperial Fleet. You have entered Imperial space without authorization. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Your species will be cataloged and your world brought under the benevolent rule of the Empire." This was the moment when most species cowered, when their leaders begged for mercy or made desperate, futile attempts to flee. Instead, the human commander smiled. "This is Captain James Walker of the Earth Defense Force vessel Defiant. We're on a peaceful exploration mission. We don't recognize your authority over this region of space." Vex blinked all 4 of his eyes in succession, a sign of shock among his kind. "Perhaps you misunderstand. The Empire controls all civilized space. We have weapons that could reduce your planets to ash. Surrender is your only option." Walker leaned forward, still smiling. "Admiral, we've been monitoring your communications for the past 3 weeks. We've analyzed your weapon systems. Your technology is impressive, but not as advanced as you seem to think." A laugh erupted from somewhere behind Walker. The captain didn't silence it. Vex felt something unfamiliar creep up his spine. Was it uncertainty? "You dare laugh at the Imperial fleet?" he roared. Walker shrugged. "No offense intended, Admiral. But your ships still use particle beam weapons. We abandoned those a century ago. And you're faster than light drives. We can see the radiation signature. Very inefficient compared to our quantum fold technology." Across the bridge of the Dominator, Imperial officers exchanged nervous glances. This wasn't how first contact scenarios usually played out. "I will give you one final chance," Vex said, trying to maintain his commanding tone. "Submit to Imperial authority or face the consequences." Walker's smile faded, replaced by a calm, determined expression. "Admiral, we've encountered 15 other spacefaring species before you. None tried to claim ownership of us. We're open to peaceful relations, cultural exchange, even trade. But humans don't surrender to threats." The human crew behind Walker nodded in agreement. None showed fear. Some looked almost eager. "Very well," Vex said coldly. "You leave me no choice but to demonstrate Imperial power." Walker nodded to someone off-screen. "We were hoping you'd say that. It'll save time. Just remember, we tried diplomacy first." The communication ended, leaving Vex staring at the 5 human ships. For the first time in his 300-year life, the Imperial Admiral felt something that would soon become familiar to the Empire when dealing with humans: doubt. Commander Drath adjusted his ceremonial armor as the Imperial shuttle docked with the human vessel. As the Empire's foremost expert on primitive species integration, he had been summoned after Admiral Vex's embarrassing first contact. The initial confrontation had ended in a tense standoff, rather than the expected quick submission. Now, 3 days later, the Empire was trying diplomacy. Remember, Drath instructed his team of 6 specialists. These humans are likely bluffing about their technological capabilities. Our mission is to assess their actual threat level while appearing to negotiate. The airlock cycled open with a hiss. Captain Walker stood waiting, flanked by 2 officers. No weapons were visible, which Drath found oddly confident. "Welcome aboard the Defiant," Walker said, extending his hand in what their cultural database identified as a greeting gesture. Drath touched the human's hand briefly, suppressing a shudder at contact with a species whose biological classification was still uncertain. "We appreciate your willingness to show us your vessel," Drath said. "The Empire values understanding new cultures before they join our collective." Walker's face showed that expression again, the one Admiral Vex had found so unsettling. Not quite mockery, but something close. "Happy to provide the tour," Walker replied. "I think you'll find it educational." Their first stop was the engine room. Drath had expected primitive nuclear reactors, or perhaps early antimatter containment systems. What he saw made him freeze in the doorway. A spherical chamber pulsed with blue-white energy, completely exposed rather than hidden behind the expected radiation shielding. Engineers moved around it casually, making adjustments to floating holographic displays. "This is our main drive core," Walker explained. "Quantum fold drive with modified Einstein-Rosen bridge capabilities." Drath's scientific advisor leaned close and whispered, "Impossible. The Empire abandoned quantum fold research 8 centuries ago. The energy requirements were too massive, and the field instabilities caused catastrophic failures." Walker gestured toward the pulsing sphere. "We solved the instability problem about 70 years ago. Found that the traditional approach was trying to force symmetry where asymmetric fields work better. Uses about 1/3 the energy of your conventional drives, from what we can tell." "You claim to understand our drive systems?" Drath asked, trying to mask his surprise. "We've been scanning your ships," Walker said casually. "Your gravitic displacement technology is impressive, but the efficiency ratio is poor. We actually tried a similar approach before discovering the fold method." Moving through the ship, Drath's dismay only grew. The humans had developed shield technology using principles the Empire had never considered. Their weapon systems were smaller but more adaptable than Imperial equivalents. Most disturbing was their computer technology, distributed systems working in concert rather than the centralized approach the Empire had used for millennia. In the medical bay, Drath watched a doctor use targeted nanobots to repair a crew member's injury in minutes, a procedure that would take days in Imperial hospitals. "This is impossible," Drath finally stated, abandoning diplomacy. "Your species has been spacefaring for how long?" "Just under 200 years, Walker replied. "We had some false starts and setbacks." "The Empire has ruled for 8,000 years, Drath said, unable to keep the defensiveness from his voice. "Our technology is the pinnacle of galactic achievement." Walker leaned against a wall, his posture relaxed. "That might be your problem right there, Commander. You stopped looking for new approaches once you found ones that worked. Humans," he smiled, "we're never satisfied. Always tinkering, always asking, what if we tried something completely different?" Drath's communications specialist was frantically recording everything. The implications were staggering. These humans hadn't just found different solutions, they'd asked entirely different questions. "The Emperor must be informed," Drath said quietly to his aide. "These humans aren't primitives to be conquered. He struggled to find the right word. "Innovators." Walker pretended not to hear, but the slight smile on his face suggested he understood exactly what was happening. The Empire was beginning to realize they weren't dealing with just another species to subjugate. They were facing equals, or perhaps something more. The massive Imperial dreadnought Invincible moved into position, its 12-kilometer length dwarfing the 5 human vessels. Behind it, 20 support ships formed a perfect attack formation. On its command deck, High Admiral Thorne observed the human ships with unconcealed contempt. "They rejected our final diplomatic solution," Thorne told his officers. The Emperor has authorized a military demonstration. Not destruction, just enough to show these humans their proper place. After Commander Drath's disturbing report about human technology, the Imperial High Command had debated for weeks. Some counseled caution, others immediate conquest. The compromise was these war games, controlled military exercises to demonstrate Imperial might without risking actual war. Begin the simulation, Thorn ordered. Standard encirclement pattern. The Imperial ships moved with practiced precision, their formation designed to trap the human vessels in a closing net of firepower. It was a maneuver that had broken the will of countless species. On the Defiant, Captain Walker watched the Imperial ships with interest. "They're using textbook encirclement," he noted to his tactical officer, Lin. "Exactly as the historical records showed." Lin nodded. 8,000 years of the same tactics. They never needed to innovate. Walker activated the ship-wide communication system. "All vessels, implement Scatter Protocol Delta. Remember, this is a demonstration, not a battle. Show them enough to make them think, not enough to make them desperate." The 5 human ships suddenly accelerated in 5 different directions at speeds the Imperial sensors struggled to track. The perfect Imperial formation, designed for enemies who moved in predictable ways, immediately began to fall apart as ships broke formation to pursue. "What are they doing?" Thorn demanded. "No species has ever." He stopped mid-sentence as the tactical display showed human vessels performing maneuvers that defied standard physics models. The ships were using their quantum fold drives for micro-jumps, appearing and disappearing in ways the Imperial targeting systems couldn't predict. "Sir, we can't lock weapons," an officer reported. The human ships began a series of coordinated attacks, darting in to touch Imperial vessels with low-power energy beams, just enough to register hits without causing damage, then vanishing before counterattacks could land. "This is not possible," Thorn muttered as his supposedly invincible fleet was systematically tagged by the humans. Not a single Imperial shot had found its target. After 20 minutes of humiliation, Walker's voice came over the communications channel. "I think that's enough for today, Admiral. Would you like to discuss what just happened?" An hour later, Thorn sat across from Walker in the Defiant's conference room, his Imperial dignity in tatters. "Your tactics make no sense," Thorn said. "There's no honor in this, darting about. No grand formations, no decisive engagements." Walker slid a data tablet across the table. "We call it guerrilla warfare. It's been used by smaller forces against larger ones throughout human history." "This is not how war is conducted," Thorn insisted. "With respect, Admiral," Walker replied, "war isn't conducted according to rules. It's about survival. When humans faced enemies with superior numbers or technology, we adapted. We never fought on their terms." Thorn studied the tactical replays, his expression troubled. "Your ships moved independently, without centralized command. Each captain has authority to make decisions based on the overall strategy," Walker explained. "We find it creates flexibility that centralized command structures lack. And these micro-jumps, using your faster-than-light drives in combat situations." Walker shrugged. "Why build a technology and then limit its applications? Every tool is a potential weapon if used creatively." As the meeting concluded, Thorn found himself facing a disturbing realization. The Empire had spent millennia perfecting one approach to warfare: overwhelming force in rigid formations. The humans had developed countless approaches, constantly evolving, never becoming predictable. "Captain Walker," Thorn said as he prepared to depart, "I must ask, if this had been actual combat, what would you have done differently?" Walker's expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something that made Thorn deeply uncomfortable. "Admiral," he said quietly, "I sincerely hope neither of us ever has to find out." The Imperial diplomatic vessel Harmony entered Earth orbit with great ceremony. On board, Lady Zell, the Empire's foremost cultural integration specialist, prepared her team for their first direct contact with human civilization. After the military debacle of the War Games, the Emperor had decided a different approach was needed. Remember, she instructed her 12-member team. Our mission is to understand these humans. Every species has cultural pressure points, beliefs, fears, or desires that can be leveraged for peaceful integration into the Empire. Her aide, Mac, nodded confidently. Our database contains successful integration strategies for over 4,000 species. We will identify their unified cultural framework quickly. The shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, landing in a designated area called Geneva. A welcoming committee awaited them. Lady Zell greeted a human official named Director Thomas. "Welcome to Earth. We've arranged a 3-week cultural tour to help you understand humanity." Zell smiled with practiced diplomacy. "The Empire appreciates your cooperation. We typically begin with meetings with your world government to establish protocols." Thomas exchanged glances with his colleagues. "That might be difficult. Earth doesn't have a single government." Zell blinked in confusion. "But you have a unified space fleet. The Earth Defense Force is a joint project, but our planet maintains 193 sovereign nations, each with its own government, laws, and customs." This was the first surprise of many. Over the following days, Zell's team struggled to make sense of human civilization. They were taken from country to country, each with different languages, religions, political systems, and social norms. In Japan, they observed a society that valued group harmony and subtle communication. In Brazil, they experienced expressive individualism and vibrant celebrations. In Kenya, they witnessed traditional tribal systems operating alongside modern democratic institutions. "This makes no sense," Mac complained during their private evening briefing. "How can a species function with such contradictory systems? The Islamic Republic of Iran and the Secular Republic of France share the same planet, but operate under completely different principles." Zell reviewed her notes with growing frustration. "Our standard classification systems don't apply. They're not a hive mind, not a hierarchical species, not a consensus culture. They're somehow all these things simultaneously." On the 10th day, they attended a university lecture on human political systems. "Democracy?" Zell asked the professor afterward. "Your people allow everyone to vote on leadership, even the uneducated." The professor nodded. "It's imperfect, but we found that giving people a voice in their governance prevents the worst abuses of power." "But surely this creates inefficiency," argued Mac. "The Empire has achieved stability through benevolent authoritarian rule for millennia." Several students nearby overheard and joined the conversation. "That's one perspective," said a young woman, "but humans tend to resist being controlled, even benevolently. We've tried empires. They all eventually fell." "Different systems work for different situations," added another student. "That's why Earth has so many governmental models. We experiment, adapt, change." That evening, Zell's team received a disturbing report. News about Earth's diversity had leaked throughout the Empire, and several subject species were asking uncomfortable questions. If humans could maintain a peaceful planet with multiple governments, why did the Empire insist on absolute conformity? During their final week, Zell noticed something even more troubling. Members of her own team were becoming influenced by human ideas. Max spent hours discussing individual rights with local philosophers. Her xenobiologist was questioning the Empire's species classification system. 2 security officers attended something called a democratic debate and returned speaking enthusiastically about freedom of speech. On their final day, Director Thomas asked a simple question: "What will you report to your Empire?" Zell considered carefully before answering. "That humans are perhaps the most dangerous species we have ever encountered, not because of your technology or military tactics, but because of your ideas." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "You don't simply resist control," Zell continued. "You question the very concept of." And that, Director Thomas, is something the Empire has never faced before. The Imperial Council chamber fell silent as Lady Zell finished her report. 12 High Lords, representatives of the oldest species in the galaxy, sat in stunned silence. Emperor Vorax, his ancient face unreadable, tapped a single claw against his throne. So these humans not only possess unexpected technology and military tactics, he summarized, but their very social structure resists our standard integration protocols. Worse than that, Your Radiance, added Admiral Thorne. News of the humans has spread throughout 17 sectors. We have reports of unrest on 32 worlds. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Unrest. Be specific. High Lord Krell, responsible for internal security, activated a holographic display. Subject species are asking dangerous questions. On Novus Prime, protesters are demanding democratic reforms. In the Centauri colonies, workers are refusing imperial quotas, citing human rights. Most disturbing, several mid-level imperial administrators have begun unauthorized communication with Earth officials. This contagion must be contained, declared Lord Drav, the oldest council member. I propose immediate military action. Destroy their fleet, bombard their major cities, and implement standard subjugation protocols. Commander Drath, who had visited the human ships, looked alarmed. My lords, I must caution against direct military action. Human technology may appear bizarre, but it is formidable. A clean victory is not guaranteed. Are you suggesting the Imperial fleet cannot defeat a single primitive world? Lord Drav's voice dripped with contempt. I suggest we consider alternatives. Drath replied carefully. My cultural exchange team believes humans could be valuable allies if approached correctly. The debate raged for hours. Eventually, the council split into two factions, hardliners demanding immediate military action, and moderates advocating cautious diplomacy. The Emperor, uncharacteristically, reached no decision. 3 days later, the decision was made for them. Lord Drav, without imperial authorization, dispatched a battle group to attack a small human colony on a planet called New Eden. 6 imperial dreadnoughts against a settlement of 20,000 humans with minimal defenses. It should have been a simple operation. It wasn't. The imperial ships emerged from hyperspace to find 3 human vessels already in orbit. Though outgunned, the human ships immediately executed what Captain Walker would later call Protocol Hornet's Nest, a series of hit-and-run attacks targeting the dreadnought's sensor arrays and communication systems. When Lord Drav's commander ordered planetary bombardment, the human ships made a desperate move. They positioned themselves directly in the bombardment path, sacrificing themselves to protect the colony. 2 human ships were destroyed. Their third, heavily damaged, sent a simple message throughout all Imperial channels. Remember who fired first. Within hours, 15 human warships arrived at New Eden. What followed wasn't just a battle. It was a humiliation. Human quantum fold drives allowed them to appear inside Imperial defensive screens. Their ships targeted propulsion and weapons systems with surgical precision, deliberately avoiding life support sections. Within 2 hours, all 6 Imperial dreadnoughts hung dead in space, their crews alive but helpless. Captain Walker's voice transmitted across all Imperial frequencies. We will evacuate your crews to the planet's surface. Medical aid will be provided. Transport ships will be permitted to retrieve your personnel. Your vessels, however, are now the property of the Earth Defense Force. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Vorax watched the battle recordings with an expression that none of his advisors could read. 8,000 years of unquestioned military supremacy had ended in a single afternoon. Summon the council, he finally said. The Empire faces a choice we have not encountered in millennia. What choice, Your Radiance? Asked his aide. The Emperor's ancient eyes reflected the holographic images of crippled Imperial ships. Whether to adapt or to fall. Across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, news of the battle spread like wildfire. The Empire had attacked, and humans had shown mercy and victory. For countless subjugated species, something long forgotten began to stir. Hope. The mining world of Tarax had been under imperial control for 12 centuries. Its people, the blue-skinned Taraxians, had long ago forgotten their ancestors' resistance to imperial rule. They worked the deep platinum mines without complaint, meeting the emperor's quotas year after year. Until the day the screens changed. Every public display on Tarax simultaneously showed the same images. Human ships defeating imperial dreadnoughts, and then, most shocking of all, Captain Walker ensuring medical care for imperial crews. Strength without cruelty, whispered an old miner named Jax. Victory without vengeance. The imperial governor ordered the broadcast shut down, but it was too late. The images had awakened something. That night, for the first time in centuries, no Taraxians reported for the midnight mining shift. Similar scenes played out across 2,000 worlds. On some planets, the rebellions were peaceful, simple refusals to obey. On others, centuries of resentment erupted into violence. The carefully maintained order of the Empire began to crack. In the Imperial Palace, Emperor Vorix faced a divided council. The humans must be destroyed, insisted Lord Drav, his faction now smaller but more determined. They are the source of this contagion. The humans merely exposed weaknesses already present in our system, countered Commander Drath, whose moderate faction had grown. Perhaps it is time for the Empire to evolve. Evolve? Into what? A weak democracy where every species demands rights. Lord Drav sneered. Before the Emperor could respond, a guard burst into the chamber. Your Radiance, the 7th Fleet has declared independence. Admiral Pax claims to be establishing something called the Free Worlds Alliance. The room erupted into chaos. The fractures had reached the military itself. 3 days later, Captain Walker received an unexpected communication request. Emperor Vorix himself wished to speak with him. Walker accepted with caution. Captain, the ancient emperor began, his voice steady despite the crisis surrounding him. Your species has accomplished something no other has managed in 8 millennia. You have broken the empire without conquering it. Walker chose his words carefully. That was never our intention, Your Radiance. We simply wanted to exist free from external control. And yet your example has inspired billions to demand the same. The Emperor's expression was unreadable. I am making you an offer, Captain. Earth will be granted special autonomous status within the Empire. Your technology and cultural practices will remain your own. In exchange, you will help us manage this transition. Walker studied the Emperor's face. You're asking us to help save the Empire. I am asking you to help prevent a galaxy-wide war, Vorix replied. Already, 15 systems are in open rebellion. 3 Imperial fleets have defected. Without some stabilizing influence, billions will die in the chaos. Walker understood the historical significance of this moment. An empire that had ruled for 8 millennia was asking for help from a species it had attempted to conquer mere months ago. Not to save the empire as it was, Walker countered, but to help build something new. A federation where worlds have self-determination, where species cooperate as equals, not as rulers and subjects. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Such a system has never existed on a galactic scale. Then perhaps it's time to try something new, Walker said simply. Within days, human diplomatic teams were dispatched throughout the galaxy. Their mission was unique in galactic history, not to conquer or control, but to mediate. On world after world, humans explained concepts that had evolved on their divided planet. Federalism, representative government, civil rights, peaceful transitions of power. Captain Walker found himself working alongside Commander Drath, once an adversary, now a partner in rebuilding. Together, they crafted a framework for a new galactic order, one where diversity was strength, not a problem to be managed. On Tarax, the old miner Jax stood in a line to vote for his world's first elected council. When asked by a human observer how he felt, he looked confused by the question. For the first time, he said, I feel like a person, not a resource. Across the galaxy, an empire fell not to conquerors, but to an idea that people could govern themselves. The Grand Council chamber on the neutral world of Harmony buzzed with activity. Representatives from 300 former Imperial worlds mingled with human delegates in the massive circular hall. The architecture itself symbolized the new era. The chamber had been designed jointly by Imperial and human architects, blending the Empire's grandeur with Earth's practical functionality. At the center table sat Captain Walker, now Ambassador Walker, beside former Commander Drath, who had surprised everyone by becoming the leader of the reform movement within the Empire. Together, they had spent the last 6 months drafting what many were calling the Galactic Charter. "Are you ready?" Drath asked quietly as the chamber began to settle. Walker nodded. "As ready as anyone can be when making history." The former Emperor Vorrex entered the chamber, no longer wearing his imperial regalia, but simple diplomatic robes. The assembly fell silent. Although he had stepped down from absolute power, Vorrex remained a respected figure whose support for the transition had prevented galaxy-wide war. "Representatives of the galaxy," Vorrex began, his voice carrying across the chamber. "For 8,000 years, the Empire maintained what we called peace through uniformity and control. We believed it was the only way to prevent chaos among different species. The humans showed us another path, unity through diversity." Walker stepped forward. "Today we propose a new system of galactic governance. Not an empire, not a single government, but a federation of independent worlds. Each planet governs itself according to its own traditions, while sending representatives to this galactic council to address matters that affect us all." The room erupted with questions. A representative from the warrior species Crag stood. "How will disputes between worlds be settled without imperial decree?" "Through mediation, and if necessary, a judicial system with representatives from all member worlds," Walker explained. "Force becomes the last option, not the first." An imperial traditionalist spoke next. "What prevents powerful worlds from simply ignoring council decisions?" Drath answered this one. "The same thing that kept Earth's nations from destroying each other: mutual benefit. Trade, cultural exchange, shared defense, and technological cooperation provide incentives stronger than any threat." For hours, they addressed concerns and explained the Charter's provisions. Former enemies found themselves engaged in constructive debate rather than power struggles. Species that had been subjugated for millennia spoke as equals with former imperial officials. Finally, it was time to vote. As representatives pressed their consensus buttons, Walker shared a glance with Director Thomas, who had joined Earth's delegation. "Did you ever imagine this when we first encountered their ships?" Thomas whispered. Walker shook his head. "I was just hoping we wouldn't have to fight a galactic war. This is beyond what any of us dreamed." The voting concluded. The Galactic Charter passed with 87% approval. Later, at the celebration, Walker found himself standing with Emperor Vorrex on a balcony overlooking the capital city's lights. "You know," Vorrex said, "for centuries, Imperial scholars debated whether we'd ever find a species that could truly challenge us. We always imagined it would be through superior technology or military might. Instead, it was through ideas." Walker finished. Vorrex nodded. "The concept that different peoples could maintain their uniqueness while working together. It seems obvious now, but it was revolutionary to us. Your Earth, with its nations and cultures that never unified yet still cooperated in space, it was the living proof our system wasn't the only path to the stars." Below them, humans mingled with dozens of alien species. Scientists from Earth were already collaborating with former Imperial researchers on technologies that combined both civilizations' approaches. Trade agreements were being formed. Cultural exchange programs established. The galaxy was awakening from the long sleep of Imperial stability into something more chaotic, but infinitely more alive. "Captain, forgive me." "Ambassador Walker," Vorrex said, "history will remember you as the human who broke an empire." Walker smiled and shook his head. I'd prefer to be remembered as the human who helped build something better." The former emperor considered this, then raised his glass. "To building something better, together." Across the galaxy, a new era had begun, not through conquest, but through laughter in the face of power, innovation in the face of tradition, and hope in the face of control.